Hello, hello, hello. I will keep going for a few minutes until I get into the park before I begin speaking. My. It is beautiful out right now. I'm probably going to go all the way from birth, maybe on some level. We'll see. Wait for this light to change. See if I can switch this around. Lovely, lovely, lovely. Boom. So, I was born a pauper to a pawn. Not entirely inaccurate, actually, but my parents were young, and I was born of wedlock. And let's see, how can I make this an engaging viewer experience? Grew up very strange. Very weird child. My parents did not know what to do with me. And they did not have a great time. Not a very easy time. I was pulled out of school when I was in second grade. And was homeschooled thereafter until graduation. When I went to college, just before I turned 16. Did not have any friends until I was like 15. Life opened up a few years after that, quite rapidly. Ended up failing out of school twice. Throughout my childhood, I was very pained, we'll say, and very fragile, very touchy. My parents didn't know what to do. They diagnosed me eventually with bipolar at 8, I think, or 7 or something, and with autism at 14. Pretty on board with autism. I'm pretty sure I'm not on board with the bipolar, but check this out, yo. Beautiful. I may actually edit into the caption that testimony I wrote. We'll see how I feel about it. Ducks. Y'all can suffer, I guess, because I am gathering my thoughts while walking. I'll have to do it once. I was very concerned with understanding things a lot growing up. Very interested in observing things, which sounds very much kind of a cheap way to say observer, but it is the name of 5 for a reason, I suppose. Not my favorite name, but very interested. My mother said my sister cried until she was picked up, and I cried until I was put down, content to sit in the corner and organize my Matchbox cars. Very unhappy when other people would fuck with them. Growing up, developed, I guess sort of, my interests manifested as a result of my natural inclination towards systems and concepts and people. Typology is a sort of natural consequence of that. Was exposed to it pretty early on with my friendships at 17 about. Learned MBTI, typed by them within a year accurately, and except for a few months last year, it's been completely solid in all dimensions. A few months last year I thought I might be IEI in socionics, while ENTP and MBTI. However, and Jungianism won out. I am NETI in every system, a priori. Every valid system, anyway. Through those years, 17 on till like 23, well, no, beyond that actually, but 17 on, began my time in a sort of cyclical pattern of romantic relationships and friendships. As a kid, actually, I was told I would come home every day crying, and that kids would fuck with me on the sly, and then I would try to hit back much less slyly, and I would get in trouble, which bent my little 5-wing 4, 9-wing 1 antipodal axis thing quite out of shape. Consequence of being homeschooled is that I didn't really get socialized that sufficiently. I never really properly learned how to integrate to a sort of cohesive social context. Probably have to wait to speak until after this little crosswalk. We'll see how it goes. See if this guy will wait for me. Thanks. Even after I got my friends, the story of sort of my social life was typically one of recurrent alienation. And the harder I tried, the less successful it seemed to be. After after I had a few years trying to expand out into my Facebook friend network in Chicagoland through the sort of homeschool mafia, making friends of friends and such. Ended up going finally to college a second time, university at Trinity in Chicagoland, and failed out of there again. But while I was there learning philosophy and psychology, it seemed to be about a sort of tipping point. Right before that, I had sort of been rebuffed by my best friend romantically, and so began a sort of years-long unrequited fixation. But it's curious to me. It does seem like maybe my learning about philosophy turned something on in my brain. There seemed to be some sort of awakening, I suppose. I became very sort of almost surprised and enamored at what I could do with my mind. There's this phrase in a certain denomination of Christianity, Calvinism, or Reformed theology, systematic theology, very TI. Which, I forgot to mention, my parents became Christians at 7, or when I was 7, I mean. And I sort of grew up in the church, started Pentecostal, but then moved to a much more heady, more theologically focused denomination, which provided the foundation for me to not be unmoored from it until very recently, which will be the end of the video. But at that time, when I was 22-ish and going to school, I sort of... Oh, that's what I was saying. The phrase for Calvinists, new converts to Calvinism, or to generally, I think it's applicable to anyone who kind of finds a new thing that they are really sort of consider the evincing rhetorical power very staggering or sort of surprising, is cage stage Calvinist, which is a phrase used for when someone who converts to Calvinism from a different denomination and is so taken by the rhetorical power that they need to be put in a cage to protect other people from their sort of rabid attempts to force other people through their logic to convert to that denomination. And that's kind of how it worked. I mean, even by then, it had been several years since I'd given up sort of correcting people's grammar and whatnot, but I was just sort of coming into this awareness of philosophy, really. I didn't really have much exposure to it prior to that. Lots of little echoes of my interest that are clearer in retrospect, but having that all unfold for me made me feel much more powerful, and legitimately made me so, I think. Didn't end up helping me in the short to medium term. And scratch my back. Ugh. But right after that, I ended up moving to Indiana due to some circumstances, and that was not the best move at the time. I don't regret any choices, but if I wouldn't have chosen that if I knew where it was going to go at the time. Ended up pretty alone. Ended up getting married in an unwise sort of, under a set of unwise premises, we'll say. And fell further into this sort of pattern of just being a very cutting person, very rigid, very difficult to engage with on anyone's terms but my own, which is, just the sort of neurosis of 5. But it's been very difficult to uproot these patterns. Surprise, surprise. They feel so purely motivated, and in my opinion, they are. But the difficult confrontation I think we must all make is that they're not effective. They don't actually get what we want, even though they often will seem to. And it's very painful and very hard to accept. I would prefer not to cry on this live video feed, so I'm measuring my words. Fell into very gradually darker and darker place after 23, 24, 25, 26, until 28 when I got divorced in February of 2017. By that point I had progressed in my isolation and in my depression and neuroses or whatever from before getting married to after, and unfortunately there's a lot of little straws that broke the marriage camel's back, but break its back they did. And by that point it was a pretty legitimate reason for separation. I was in legitimate pain and whatnot, but also was legitimately abusive, and that made the years following the divorce very, very difficult. I ended up within a year losing my job, and just from not showing up to work and just sitting in my room for a long time. And by this point, I found enneagram I found enneagram for 45 minutes in 2011, and was like, this is dumb, and then stopped looking at it. And then in 2015, I found it again, and immediately began chewing through it. So by 2017, late and into 2018, my friends had sort of been like, you're an 8, and I was like, no. That was very painful to try to rationalize, which is a thing that the sort of type police don't seem to have much cognizance of, the ways that the types we don't want to be can be even the most popular types. There are undoubtedly many people who are like, no, not 4. I never wanted to be that type. But there are also people who really don't want to be 4s, in a visceral way. I'm not one of them. I loved pretending I was a 4. However, I really didn't want to be an 8 or a 1. Those are the 2 types that would have made the sort of maxim of the type that makes you the most uncomfortable or pain to accept is the right one. And those are the ones that are most pain, that I most didn't want to see myself as. Lucky me, I'm 9 fixed. But by the end of 2018, I was homeless and living in my car, and just sort of like the health levels. It's hard to see initially until pretty recently myself in the health levels and personality types, the book, in 5. However, any day of the week I could read the health levels for 4 and would be like, this is so authentically representative of my internal experience. And is really kind of a portrait of what happened for 5 and 4, really. I mean, I think in the health levels for 5, it really even says specifically like a low health 5 may end up like living out of their car in an attempt to like withdraw all sort of external connections, which is what happened. Side note, I actually just realized a few months ago that my shoelaces, when I took them out of my boots because they were broken, and I was like, I'll get these fixed, I never put them back in, and I realized that that was a sort of manifestation of 5 as well, a sort of rejection of like, fuck you shoelaces, you won't control me. Which is silly to realize, but interesting. I forget what that name of that specific disorder is. It's something like demand sensitivity dysphoria or sensitivity syndrome or something like that. It's something like that, and that is certainly so deeply embedded in my unconscious thought process. It's listed as a sort of subdivision of autism, or like a facet of it or whatever, and probably also, but it also is very 5-ish. And so I continued for several years trying to like cope with the self-hatred and the unconscious terror and whatnot, living in my car and having no real friends, just sort of narcotizing with smartphone games and learning enneagram. By 2019 by 2019 I'd ended up switching from 8 to 4 and not really paying much attention to tri-type, or just sort of like, maybe I'm a 478, maybe I'm a 417. And there's a puppy. And in early 2019, I ended up in EU. That was when they only had like 200 some members, I think. Something like that. It did not go well, as is a sort of mirror of, you know, all my social interactions in some way. But after getting banned from there, I ended up in another group called Enneatude. Let me think actually if I'm missing any important points, because after this it gets pretty dense in terms of journey landmarks. I think at the end of 2019, by the end of 2019 I had joined Enneatude, run by Erica or Animal or Erica Xen or whatever, who's her own person, and most significantly met this woman named Robin, who recognized my type essentially completely correctly, like everything about it, within a few minutes of seeing my profile after I posted in their group. And then it took like a year after that for me to accept it. By the end of that year, I'd moved back to Chicago from Michigan in an attempt to like move back to where I thought I had some friends that I could reconnect with. They were not here. There was no friends here for me. But Chicago's nice. And still, at that point, my car had broken down too much, and I was living on like public transit and trains and stuff, and Denny's and things in the winter, which had its own blessings. I relied a lot on spite to get through, but also had a lot of beautiful aspects to that, in my opinion. At the end of that year, I tried real hard to venture out of my shell and like connect to some random Facebook event. Some like art house was running like a free hip-hop beats night, and I went there, and then after that I went to this like, just like, you know, something like a movie, like a basement rave with like just in some alley entryway. It was pretty dope. Ended up getting connected to some people, trying Molly for the first time, which was revelatory. Highly recommend it for a lot of reasons, for a lot of people in most situations, with some caveats that I won't go into here, but especially for fives, probably, or survival or self-pres doms, and a few different configurations more than others can really benefit. But ended up connecting to those friendships. I had met Robin in person by the end of 2019, and then mid-2020 is when I accepted my type as real and stopped pretending I was a 4. Early 2020, COVID hit, obviously, and then I didn't really have much opportunity to make friends after that. Well, I had a circle of friends, and I even found like a partner, but some drama happened, and some people made some false accusations, and everyone canceled me and dropped me. That was also very painful, including my partner, who didn't have the spine, I suppose, to stick with me. And I don't. There's a better way to say that doesn't sound harsh, because I don't mean it harshly. They are very sensitive and six-fixed, and find it very confusing when there's all this talk about that kind of thing. Later on, a year later or so, we would reconnect and are now friends again. But that essentially meant for pretty much all of COVID, I was fully alone, even after I had just sort of began to blossom into this like dream of dreams social sexual life that I wanted, full of dancing and art and punks and shit. It was dope. But I'm trying to recapture something now, slowly but surely. In this time, 2020, I just continued learning theory mostly. Began to stop in 2020 telling people they were wrong online for the most part. I've never stopped that, and I probably won't stop that. I have stopped doing it so visibly and sort of, you know, belligerently in some way. It stopped. I started recognizing the inefficacy of it, though started, emphasis on the word started. I'm still learning the inefficacy of teaching anyone anything. I don't think you can teach people things. I think you can only skillfully provide the context for people to learn. And that's somewhat apparently different, but deeply substantively different. Throughout that time, I was continuing to like track more of my own patterns. And the sort of formalization of the algorithm that I used, I'll post it in the comments if someone reminds me if I forget. But essentially, I had begun to use the enneagram in this way to identify and sort of taxonomize my problems, and then would begin to use the enneagram to formulate a sort of egosyntonic, alternative, healthier strategy that isn't, just don't be afraid or whatever. White knuckling it is not how it works. You don't grow that way. And then I would practice looking in historical patterns until I was able to find myself even in the moment consciously going, oh, I'm doing the thing again. And once you're able to go from oh, yesterday I did the thing again, damn it, to oh, fuck, I'm doing it right now, and then going from oh, I'm doing it right now, let me stop doing it. And for a while, actually, in 2020 into 2021, I began to be worried that Enneagram wasn't actually helpful or do anything. It was astonishingly accurate to me in a way that I will begin to talk about in a minute. But it didn't seem to be changing me in any visible way. And after I stopped living in my car, it was a lot easier even to see some of the changes that happened, because being woken up by cops in the middle of the night a lot and never sleeping for more than a few hours or whatever is not good for growth. But around that time I ended up posting in a bunch of groups hey, has the Enneagram helped you, and can you share how? Because I'm wondering does it actually do anything, because it seems like everybody's mistyped, and it's confusing how it can be helpful to anyone when everyone is mistyped, even most of y'all, sorry, but it seems easily, without blinking, I would affirm that 90% of people are mistyped. If people are only talking about their core, then it's probably lower than that, but it seems and I got a surprising degree of authentic sounding responses, and I believed them. And then I had this one moment that was the first moment that I was I was reacting, became aware that I was reacting, and then the awareness itself completely dissolved the reactivity, and I was I know that I was just fighting, but actually I explained why it was just ego, and I was I have no more motivation to be upset about it. I just see how stupid it is. Never mind. I'm sorry. And I was damn. I've been trying to get to the point where that happens for years, and so it finally happened, and I was okay, this is real. Apart from any sort of I can't see myself growing a millimeter a week or whatever, but your friends who visit you can. And people have commented on my change, François, whatever, did here, which is a pleasant surprise. I'm not used to people noticing that, but it seems, and it's just gotten better and better throughout 2020. I used my connections to experiment with acid as well, which was not as transformative in 2020, but it was doing things. I would just take a tab of acid and then just have a really profound cathartic experience that was meaningful in some inarticulable way, and it was just sort of helping loosen my unconscious. It was fracking my unconscious. which was needed. I would just like get high, observe beauty, and then like sob, and then be like, all right, next month, cool. Fell out. I became more and more insular in terms of like enneagram groups. I just stopped interacting for the most part by sometime in 2021, I think, outside of a very narrow range. It was just fruitless. A lot of people spinning their wheels in the dimension that I cared about, which was theoretical advancement and like accuracy or whatever. There are a lot of people who are not doing that in terms of actual growth, but they're not achieving the growth via theory. Though you can, but few do that, it seems. Personally, I think that I now understand the Enneagram on a theoretical level better than anyone else in the world. But I am not very high achieving in terms of understanding it in any sort of like embodied emotional or physical level. Lots of people who outstrip that. Specifically in like a TI sense, I mean, because someone like Almas or something, his understanding just seems a little too intuitive, though. Not really super rigid. In any case, 2021 began slowly sort of like just building my expertise and working towards some loose goals of having a website. 2021, like going into 2021, just questions started surfacing. How can a system like the Enneagram exist? Who can construct such a system? And how can its statements be so true when the statements stand in such stark opposition to the sort of axiomatic bases I'd had for my worldview up until that point, which was like a Christian outlook. It's because Enneagram is inextricably Gnostic, which is heretical by almost every Christian denomination's standards. I'm in that Keys to the Enneagram course that Matry and Hudson are doing, and lots of those teachers like to talk about whatever faith you believe or source or whatever. I don't know how I feel about that, because it just seems like, I guess it's fine, but the Enneagram pretty clearly contains certain suppositions about the nature of reality that are just flatly incompatible with certain worldviews. And so I've been like, how can this Enneagram system exist and the Bible be true as I understand it? And so, long story short, going at the beginning of 2021, I had two transformative experiences on acid. The first one, I got some tabs from this dude. He's like, careful, these are double strength. And I was like, maybe I'll do two then. Just YOLO it and see what happens. And then I did that, and I told Marshall, I was like, I just took two of these double strength ones. He's like, I was like, I'm thinking about taking two. He's like, you probably shouldn't do that. And I'm like, oh, I just did. And he just sends that like gif of Woody waving. He's like, so long, partner. And that is exactly what happened. It was quite the experience. I thought myself out of existence. After that happened, after I sort of like had this realization that was like building and building over a few hours, I was like, wait, this means, and that means, and like I couldn't write it down fast enough, I couldn't like draw it fast enough, I couldn't type it fast enough, I ended up like trying to audio record it, and eventually I just like fell silent and was just sort of like in my head and was like, oh. And then that's when like the sort of like edges of reality started like seeming to open up to me in this like higher dimensional view of things. And it was frankly terrifying. I did not want to not exist. I did not want to be one with everything. The last thought I remember having was of this girl I was in love with. And I was like, if we're like the same substance, then I can never like be with her qua her. I can only like be her. And I don't want to be her, I want to be with her. And then insert quotation from Gandalf here or whatever. Like I fell out of all time and space. Then I came back. And I was like very shaken. I couldn't sleep for another like 12 to 18 hours. I couldn't like be alone with my thoughts. I binge watched an entire like anime straight, even though I was completely fucking exhausted. And I was like, I need constant stimulation to keep my thoughts from potentially going down this same path again and building to the same thing where I get ripped out of existence. And I really want to exist, so I need to keep my mind occupied as hard as I can. And then finally it was like, 12 to 18 hours before I could be alone with my thoughts for as much as like 15 seconds in silence. That was very stressful. After that, I fell out with some friends and ended up in my own server. And I've been there pretty much since. You good?
You okay? Yeah.
Someone just fell over. I've been pretty much just in my own server, building my own understanding and filling out my database and whatnot. Learning and introspecting and whatnot. It was at the end of 2021 that I had the other bookend of that year's experiences, whereby I feel I finally unlocked a sort of degree of understanding of the structure of the enneagram and its meaning that made everything make sense after the whole year of like just sort of like stewing of like, wait, so if non-dualism is true, then like how can it be true? Like what would that mean for it to be true? My TI had, for probably the first time in its life, had to completely restructure, because the way TI works is you take in information and you judge it against the logical consistency of, as established by some superstructure of internal sort of truth propositions or whatever. And so like you have this understanding of the way the world works, and you hear new information and you compare it against that current sort of chunk of understanding you have. And for me, it's only been the case that I've gotten new information and I didn't have, like, for example, learning about politics in high school. I didn't have preconceptions on how politics worked, and so I just sort of like set about constructing something self-consistent. It wasn't until end of 2021, or I guess the beginning of 2021, the ego death experience, where I was faced with like something that was self-evidently true. Though the farther into the year I got, the further into memory it faded, and so the easier it was to like push it away from my awareness and ignore its implications. But still, I couldn't forsake it. I had authentically experienced it, and it required the deconstruction of a lot for it to exist in any sort of self-consistent way with the rest of my belief system. And it wasn't until the end of 2021 that I sort of found the key to lock it back into an overarchingly self-consistent. And so all of this year has essentially been me thinking my way through those consequences and just sort of like reconstructing a philosophy that is much stronger now, but is of less volume initially, and I'm sort of like going back out and reconstituting all the ideas that I had from these new axioms. And it's been very exciting. I have been very affirmed in how often I have come to learn retroactively that like decades or centuries like dead philosophers have like concretized these ideas that I'm coming up with organically. And I now see truly like the history of philosophy really is footnotes on Plato. Plato may have been the most intelligent human who ever existed, I don't know, but he's fucking insane. I've yet to see a philosopher I agree with, that I see truth in, that truth doesn't seem to me to be a sort of recapitulation in higher granularity or resolution of the same broad strokes of Plato and his sort of like, I'm sure you guys have all heard the accusations of enneagram as being like Neoplatonic or Pythagorean or whatever. That's what they mean. Everything is Neoplatonic as far as I can tell. Even 20th century philosophers who would deny that just seem to me to be averse for egoic reasons to accepting the congruence of their ideas with a sort of updated Neoplatonism. But that ego death experience and other acid experiences wherein I would on the day after just feel so embodied and so present and so compassionate in such just like a way that I felt was truly in line with my values and the way that I want to be in the world. That Googling, I'm like, how can I be this way all the time? And the answer universally is meditation, it seems, which my survival last stacking, my self-pres last stacking is not the best at such habituation. I am a sort of habituated anti-habituator. It feels like suffocation to even read a book, read an entire article, whatever. Thankfully, I live in the age of YouTube. But so this year I ended up, well, let me think if I want to jump that far ahead yet. Continued, I mean, really all that's happened to change me is that I have not interacted with y'all for a long time, and I've just been gradually improving. And so in the absence of observing the gradual ascent, all you see is the ascension in full. Those that see it anyway. Because any week I am hardly better than the week before, but 3 years on, I am quite different. I'm excited for where things are going. It does feel like I wasted the first 30 years of my life, but also I have ideally even more than 30 years left, so it's hardly the case that I'm going to die soon, say. So I shouldn't worry about not having enough time left. I also post, second sort of like visionary revelation trip. I now feel like I have a reason to like live, at least. Before I was just sort of like, resigned basically to my existence as a sort of tragic failure of potential. And I was just like, all right, well, I guess I can like sort of, numb my way through life and get what fun out of it I can. But now, not only am I sort of like eagerly engaging with life, or like eager to, at least, if I'm not necessarily embodying that fully yet, I'm also no longer afraid to die, which is really beautiful. Another thing that came out of this, after I've changed my viewpoints from anything any Christian of the last 1,000 to 1,500 years would not call heretical, is I see so much more truth in the Bible now than I used to. Like I've been very upset growing up to be in such like a logically high fidelity church context where they have theological answers and they have true rhetoric that isn't stupid or dogmatic. However, what they don't have is passion. They don't really have the heart of Christ as they preach. The churches that do have that have fucking insane ideas about theology that are like completely inconsistent and make no fucking sense, which makes it really fucking hard for me to feel like I can belong there either. And I don't think that's incidental. I think it's a sort of necessary consequence of the false basis of modern Christianity. And obviously, you watching this may be Christian, and good. I'm glad. I don't have anything against Christians now. I am not a sort of bitter deconstructionist by any means. It is surprising to me that I should now be so amenable to this sort of like Unitarian Universalist idea of like everyone's going to heaven, basically, because that was like, only weak-minded people believe that a few years ago. Chilly out. My hand is really fucking cold holding this phone up. Damn. Can you see the moon? Yeah. But I mentioned the Christian thing and the difference because so much of the Christian teachings now are just so, and again, I also still don't want to cry on this live, but they're so beautiful and like so viscerally meaningful in a way that people spoke of them as being, whether they themselves, the speakers, experience in that way or not, I don't know. But like now, for the first time, I feel like, God, whatever, the universe loves me so much in a way that I know is true because I've experienced it, that like, how can I not extend that same love to other people? Whereas before it was just a sort of like intellectual compulsion of like, yes, it only makes sense that it says right here God loves me, and logically that makes sense, so logically it would make sense that I should love others, and that's what I will endeavor to do. Much harder to actualize that than it is to be desperate to love others as a consequence of the immediacy of that felt love. And also just a lot of other biblical passages have like struck me as just like astoundingly deeply metaphorical in like their like just cosmic truths. I'm like, okay, this makes way more sense than, you know, the idea that God was like, okay, Adam, I want you to name these animals. This one's giraffe, this one's rhino. Like, imagining that actually happening in like a literalist way is like, okay, sure, why not? But having it in like a sort of metaphorical frame, it stands out to me as far more deeply true. And I won't get into it too much, but yeah. What else? Been now slowly progressing towards endeavors to like write some sort of book on a mixture of like enneagram and a theory of everything, a very like deeply syncretic way of, ideally in my mind, would be to bring back a sort of appreciation for mysticism and mystery to, you know, a sort of Luciferian plagued enlightenment born West, or whatever, I don't know. It just seems I want to bring back intellectual humility and like curiosity, because a lack of it is the only thing blocking whatever love exists from being actualized. And it's just that, oh man, Enneagram is just so powerfully beautiful, and it's just so fulfilling to engage with. It's like made me super interested in like quantum mechanics and astronomy and history and biology and all these things. And I just see it everywhere. And I see other people seeing it, though they don't know that that's what they see. Because what the Enneagram is just a semi-arbitrary concretization of the truly organizing principles of reality. And so when other people observe these same principles, for they are, in a sense, there to be observed by whomever has the eyes to see them, it only makes sense that they would be conciliant, in the sense that these disparate sources of truth counter confirm each other. And that's my mission, a sort of like methodology that I hope to actualize, is to show that there is a frame for understanding everyone whom we might, if we were honest with ourselves, say seems to have some sort of intuitive edge on a truth. Like, sure, you may deny that there are you know, 10 avatars of Mahadevi in Hinduism. But is it that easy for you to deny that there's something true there, if you're honest with yourself? I think it would be, because nothing lasts for thousands of years if it doesn't have truth in it. Nothing lasts at all if it doesn't have truth in it, for even a plank second. But hang on a second, it's probably going to get too loud to hear me as I cross this road. So that's where I'm at, I guess. This year I met a few people that I've been really blessed by their guidance and sort of, holy shit, big old truck horn. I met Dana McGuire in a random Discord server. Well, not random, but... And she's been really challenging a lot of my understandings of things and sort of presuppositions about things. She's gotten me into the diamond approach, and I'm in a group with her where we do their sort of Ridwan School's inquiry, which is basically like a more refined and full-bodied version of what I've sort of just been doing instinctively, or one could say egoically even, from the youth. I could go into why that would be egoic and by what structures, but it would be more detail than I'm willing to explain at the moment without knowing my audience. But another person is, I got into IEA's mentorship pilot program, and my mentor is so beautiful. She's this like Italian woman who is a breath worker, and she's been teaching me about as much about anatomy as about anything else, and it's been very pouty about the fact that my body does have control over my emotions and thoughts, which is frustrating, and I wish I could control it with just my mind, but sadly no. It's been very impressive the way that she's been able to essentially answer all of my problems and sort of like questions and struggles with pay attention to your body, but in a non-arbitrary way, where by saying it, damn dude, by saying it in like a particular way, or aiming it, or like couching it from a specific perspective, whatever, each time it's sort of like authentically responsive to my actual issue, which is impressive. People aren't lying when they talk about the power of meditation, and I haven't even really witnessed anything beyond the surface. I posted an excerpt earlier today from a guy I met in enneagram openings. I don't want to share my thoughts on him too much necessarily, but it's kind of weird guy, but he's cool. But that excerpt was from his essay called The Living Enneagram, and I found it a few years ago, right when it was very much applicable to me. In this, people want to say, "Oh, what the fuck? Figure out your shit, dude. Stop honking your fucking horn right there. What the hell? Can't even imagine how loud it must be for the people right next to the street right there." Anyway, people want to be like, wings are too much detail. There's only 9 numbers. Tri-type is too much detail. Whoa, now you got wings on fixes? Oh, okay, now there's wings on wings. And it's like, I won't go into why that's kind of silly perspective, because their resistance isn't rational, it's egoic. But it's been borne out in my experience that the more specific you get, the less rigid you are able to become, it feels. As I'm currently dealing with a sort of set of, things, whatever, fixes and wings or whatever, that there are 186,624 different configurations in Enneagram, as I count them. Discriminable. There are certainly, almost certainly, nigh infinitely more, but that I can meaningfully discriminate. That has gone a long way to just defanging so much of the bias and so much of the stereotyping and so much of the whatever there is. It's very difficult to say anything of one type that is true of everyone of that type, except for, the bare, naked structure of it, which is not really saying much of a person of that type. And in that, it has been an immense blessing, and one I hope to share with people, that far from serving as a sort of like substantiation of delusion or something that would rigidify and calcify understandings of a fluid nature and a fluid person that you encounter. It really seems to do the opposite and sort of, man, there are a ton of fucking rats. What the hell? I don't know that I have a nice capstone for that line of thinking, but let me think if there's anything else relevant to my growth. Gurdjieff. I've been in this Gurdjieff group here in Chicago, and we've been going through In Search of the Miraculous. And I'm not through it yet, so I don't want to make pronouncements about it, but much as seems to be the case whenever I happen upon sort of old canonical texts in Enneagram, there's so much in it that nobody seems to be aware of. Everyone's like, oh yes, this book, that book. But it seems like none of them read it, or if they did read it, they didn't understand it, which is something Gurdjieff talks about. I only bring it up because I think Gurdjieff talks about the necessity of working in a group, which I recognized very early on. It seems the reason why so few people type correctly is because there are so few people who are in anything like a close-knit, intimate group who are working together to spot check each other. I wouldn't be typed correctly without people telling me what my type was, I don't think. I probably would have gotten there eventually somehow, which is I got where I am because of the same reason. But I think I would have gotten there, I don't know, it's hard to imagine a sort of situation that can't exist. I would have gotten there because I would have found somebody who would have had the information I wanted. So to hamstring myself and pretend that I wouldn't have done that is sort of nonsensical, so I can't really, comment on that. But there are a lot of people. David Gray is a prime example of someone who is one of the best theorists, and yet strikingly mistyped. Not to consider all of these great teachers and typists, typists, great teachers and theorists who can't type for their way out of a paper bag. It's weird to me, but I guess I brought that up not just to say that a group has been helpful for me, but the love of others has been really transformative and is maybe the only thing that can transform. Shout out to my best friend, Kelly Moore, who's just been one of the most beautiful connections that I've had and been able to like really feel safe with her and trust her and such. And that's been super important, I think. It's really hard alone, even if you're not social dom, which I am. She's survival social, 9 wing 8, 7 wing 6, 3 wing 2. And that like 9 wing 8 durability has been very powerful, and for good theoretic reasons. 8 is not a coincidence, I think, that so many 8s, or that, I guess I should say, that 8s are so overrepresented among spiritual teachers. What else would I say has been transformative for me? I don't know. I really would say that that it's mostly just been love, I suppose. Just people who have modeled it and been sort of who have like empowered me through their own like sturdiness, I suppose. And just the sort of like steadfastness, I suppose, of not attempting to force me to do things. Although for some people, it really depends on who you're talking to, on what will help them, because I feel very reticent to give any sort of universal advice except for love and truth. Truth in love. But what form that takes is very personal to be helpful. Yeah, I don't know how many of you guys will watch this. I'm skeptical that, well, I don't know. Few people agree with my self-typing. Very, very few. And that's, on one hand, sort of irrelevant. But on the other hand, like, given that this is sort of like my singular obsession and like the thing I spend like hours and hours a day, every single day, thinking and talking about, it is frustrating. So I suppose every time I think about it, the answer just keeps coming back to I should just stop complaining and whining and actually publish information, write my damn website, and then let people come to me. I think I'll probably end the video soon. I'll think for another few minutes to see if there's anything else I want to say. Funnily enough, part of my sort of like this blow to my certainty that enneagram has brought has forced me to like be like, I don't know, maybe things are true that I didn't think they could be. Maybe the stars can tell me about my personality. There's this sort of astronomy spin-off mixed with Tao Te Ching called Human Design, which some of you may know, that has been a bit uncanny, uncomfortably uncanny. I don't like astronomy. I don't like the nonsensicality of it. I don't like how I can't grip it with my TI. However, it do be uncannily accurate in some unsettling ways. One of which is that my design apparently is telling me that If I try to make people hear what I want them to hear, they will not like it. They will hate me and it won't go well. Whereas if I let people come to me and ask me things, that is how it should be and what will like be good, which is very frustrating because I got things to say, a lot of things. But that's actually something I've learned recently, and one of the most freshly raw lessons I've been learning of how you can't teach other people, really. I've had this friend that's been like kind of suicidal even, and to just be with her and have her be like so convinced of her own worthlessness, while I am so convinced of her worthiness, and yet unable to coerce her to believe it. It's a very painful sense of like impotence and helplessness to like desperately want someone to feel loved, that you love because you love them, but they, you know, can only accept the love they think they deserve, which is not something you can change about them. You can only provide skillfully the context for its autonomous change, in a sense, which sucks. I would like to make people feel loved. I'm gonna cross the street, hang on. I think that might be it. I think if there's anything else I would say, or if I would encapsulate it, maybe be humble. You can make no progress if you are not humble. Be with other people. You can make no progress alone. Faith, I suppose. You really... The proof comes after you believe in it. Which many will maybe rant and rail about, and how that's an excuse of the deluded, which it is. But it's also the provenance of the enlightened, I suppose. Anything else that I would say would be love yourself and do drugs.